So fire, we know, is a chemical reaction that requires heat, oxygen, and fuel, which my work primarily focused on fuel. So specifically looking at live and dead plants. So in a wildfire situation, we know that what's burning is primarily live and dead plants. And then in shrublands, living fuels, so living plants, are going to dominate the fuel matrix, which is interesting because the characteristics of live plants are going to vary over time and have other kind of dynamic properties that are indeed kind of the nature of the living plant material. So then we start thinking about questions of scale. How do we think dynamics at kind of the particle scale with fuel particles, branches, etc. that we can test in the lab? Does what matters there still matter at the scale of what's going to influence structural hazard from plants? And does what matters here still matter at the scale of a wildfire? So these massive landscape scale dynamics. So we will primarily be focusing on structural hazard. So I'll start you guys again with another foundational concept, the WUI, so the wildland-urban interface, where communities abut or blend in the wild vegetation, and where wildfire can move from wild vegetation into communities. So I have a little graphic for everyone. So how does fire hazard work in the system? So we want to specifically think about how fire hazard is functioning in the WUI, and then where do we intervene to reduce fire hazard in the WUI? So thinking again at this particle scale up to more landscape scale hazards. So the first question that we usually ask is, could there be a fire? So we look at the landscape, we look at the plants, we also look at the weather, and then we think, okay, could there be a fire today? And then we distribute that information to communities. So observed fuel properties, we have this widely cited live fuel moisture 60% threshold, potentially other thresholds interacting with weather, terrain, and fuel type. So observe the plants and then categorize the hazard, communicate it to people. And then the next question we ask is the fire likely to be bad? So here's where we're going to really start thinking about these red flag conditions. Is there humidity, and specifically here is there wind? So ultimately, this is kind of the topic we're looking at today. How do we protect our homes and property from fire? And the step that we're really looking at is defensible space. So I'm kind of interpreting defensible space here as modification to fuels. So modification to the plants around structures. And how do we do that to reduce fire hazard? So these were some of my dissertation questions. So what questions do we need to answer to improve response and reduce fire hazard across scales? So first our landscape scale, but also our structure hazard scale. So specific questions, how and why do different species burn differently? So thinking about the things that we can control around defensible space. One of the things we can control is what kind of plants are in the defensible space. So we need to know why and how do those species burn differently, and what does that mean? What drives the probability an ignition will turn into a wildfire? So this is a higher level question of like, assuming you drop an ignition onto the landscape, what's going to contribute to that ignition turning into a wildfire? And then how do we apply the answer to these questions to improve WUI response and WUI hazard? So the primary focus that I'm looking at today is how and why do different plants burn differently? And then how do we use the answers to that question to inform WUI management and hazard reduction? So this is kind of the fun stuff. These are all the species that we tested throughout that study. So there are some really common ones on here, from California buckwheat to chamise, coyote brush, lemonade berry, Eucalyptus was also in here. And I don't have time to share everything with you guys, but if you're curious, you're welcome to contact me after. But here's kind of like the sampling that we did. So we sampled at 4 different locations across Santa Barbara, from Painted Cave to OSM, all the way down to Eucalyptus at UC Santa Barbara. So there were 4 locations, and then for each species, 5 plants were sampled at each location to get a representative kind of group of the plants there. And here's what that looked like. So these are some of our interns in the field sampling black sage. We did not sample for my own here, but sampling plants out on the landscape. Here's some buckwheat and some cool critters that we found out sampling. And then we also sampled all the way through the summer drought. So it was really important not just to sample once, but to capture how these plants were changing through the year and how their flammability was changing in response to those traits changing through the year. So we sampled every 2 weeks from July 21st through December 1st.
What do you mean by sampling? What are you doing when you're sampling?
Yeah, so we would go out and we would cut a bunch of plants. So we would cut usually a branch about this big, and then we would break it into 25 centimeter samples and burn those. And the idea was to burn them as quickly as possible after they were cut, to try to keep things as close as possible. But there are different thought philosophies on that too.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this is what our combustion testing looked like in a diagram. So we burned as soon as possible after collection. There were 2 500 Celsius hot plates that were used to start combustion. So samples were set on a little wire mesh just over the hot plate. Typically that heated the sample up enough that it started releasing volatile chemicals, and then those would rise into the hot wire, and that would ignite and travel down and ignite the sample. So I have a couple of pictures show what that looked like. This is me testing the hot wire ignition system. This is white sage, which released a really dense little plume of volatiles. And then these are also a couple of our interns and a grad student doing something called pressure bombing, where you actually measure the internal pressure of the water in the plant. So it's a measure of drought stress for different species. So we did that, and we also directly measured the moisture content of the plants. Here's a couple more. This is our hot wire ignition system, and then this is the combustion chamber in action. What did we find? Properties of live plants. We did find that different characteristics of the plants did influence the flammability components of their outcome, which I have a couple more sketches to break that down for you. So plant traits are listed on the bottom. This is almost everything we sampled. So that's all kind of listed out for you, and then we're like, okay, how is this gonna influence ignitability, combustibility, and sustainability? Which these we would call flammability components. So there are different ways to kind of think about plant flammability, and this like thought process or thought structure is like, okay, flammability is made up of these 3 different things, and those are ignitability. So how easily does the plant catch fire? If you hold a match to it, like how quickly does it light? Does it light at all, or does it just kind of sit there? And then combustibility, this is the intensity of the burn. So we're looking at flame height, assuming it's ignited, how aggressively or how large does it burn? And then sustainability, how long does it burn? So we measured each of these 3 different things, and then performed like statistical modeling to try to predict what traits were actually influencing which of those 3 things and in what ways. So this is kind of the spark notes, but these are the most important ones for each component. In general, more mass produced bigger flames and a longer burn time, which is not super surprising. we also found finer stems were producing bigger flames and a shorter burn, which is also kind of in line with what you would expect. And fuel moisture actually came out to be really important across the board. So higher fuel moisture led to more difficult to ignite. So if there was more fuel moisture, it was a lot harder to ignite certain species. And then it also gave you like shorter flames, so smaller combustibility, less intense burning. And I'm gonna give you guys a couple quick species highlights. Just 4 that stood out. Lemonade berry was overall our lowest flammability species that we tested. It had the highest LFM and no natural ignitions. So that means I would set this thing in our 500 Celsius hot plates on top of them, underneath that wire, and not a single one of them ignited under those conditions. So in order to get like the rest of the results, I would eventually reach in and light it, but it did not ignite naturally under test conditions. Laurel sumac was also pretty low flammability. From the species or the individuals we tested, it had very high LFM, which may have had something to do with that. And then chemise had the highest flammability of the plants that we tested. Of the individuals we tested, it had very low fuel moisture, with a low density needly structure, fine stems, and tiny needles, which probably contributed to that. And then last was white sage. This species actually broke expectations. So this guy had a very high ignitability. It was very easy to ignite, but it also had a high fuel moisture. So this actually spawned off kind of the next round and iteration of grad student studies, where we're asking kind of like, why did white sage ignite so well, given that it has such high fuel moisture? And now we're thinking that there's potential for volatile storage, which was not new either, but Joe Celebrezzi is now looking at like breaking apart exactly what volatiles are potentially driving and what flammability performance. So how do we use this information? Ultimately, I'd like to keep testing like relative species comparisons and flammability, but why is this useful? What do we do with this? First, we know there are more traits to account for. So volatiles are not, it's not like a one and none. It's not every plant has the same volatile, it's just different quantities. There are different volatile chemicals in different plants in different quantities, and it could change over the year. So we need to investigate that. We also see for defensible space, species selection does matter. Some species perform very differently for flammability, and also maintenance and spacing matter. So biomass accumulation and hydration are both going to matter to reduce like ignitability and combustibility for the plants. So how do we do this? We are looking at producing recommendations for defensible space landscaping. So that's advice on plant selection and maintenance. And currently, the Botanic Garden, we are looking at working with the Fire State Council and Santa Barbara City to use science to revamp their recommended or disrecommended plant lists. And this is what that could potentially look like. So this would be a tool developed for use by landscapers and experts to think about what plants to recommend towards landscaping and defensible space. So this is not set in stone at all, but this is something that we're kind of looking at developing out with them. So that's what I've got. I'm happy to take questions from anyone, or how do we move to the next stage? Questions? Yep. Yeah.
You didn't seem to do any trees except eucalyptus, which probably was rapidly.
Yes. Yeah. I think it burned for a very long time and had a relatively high flame rate.
What about oak trees?
Yeah, oaks. I would need to pull up the diagram for them, but they were relatively hard to ignite and had moderate responses for other things. But they were difficult to ignite.
Yeah. The trees would be really interesting to people because like that around Rattlesnake Canyon, we've got pepper trees up the wazoo. One place has lots of eucalyptus, and then there's oaks all over the place too.
Yeah, this is actually something we're trying to submit a proposal for right now to do like relative flammability comparison of different native species and oaks, specifically trees. Yeah.
Would that lingonberry make a good hedge?
That's what we would think that it could, but you would want to recommend it within the defensible space guidelines. So I would say it would be better than other species, but I really want to test some non-native species and other hedge species that people use to say that conclusively. This will go.
So we have a lot of native plants in our planting, and I'm kind of curious about, I've always felt like if they're on some kind of irrigation schedule, that obviously you're gonna keep their plant moisture up much higher than they are in their natural environment. So like for instance, in the 5 to 30 foot zone, if you have natives there and they get even like irrigated once every 15 to 20 days, could we consider that planting to be pretty fire resistant?
That would depend a lot on the species. We also, again, would not recommend kind of breaking with the defensible space guidelines. This is more to think about like what's going to be relatively more or less flammable. This is also something that I'm working with our horticultural team on right now to identify native species that can take irrigation throughout the year or that don't need it to stay well hydrated throughout the year. And once we identify those species that are like water-wise species, do combustion testing and get that answer of how fire resistant or not they might actually be. Yeah.
It might be worth trying to combine that with how much they can be pruned.
Yeah.
Just take white sage, for example. I mean, that's a species that maintains pretty good life-filled moisture even during the summer, and yet it's super flammable. But it can really take pruning. So, you could still have that as a plant allowable in your landscape as long as soon as the spring is done, you cut that thing way back, right? So adding into your ultimate guidelines, the prunability of the plant and its ability to withstand heavy pruning.
No, that's something we're thinking about. That's something we'd like to incorporate into those recommendations. Something like, okay, this species is allowable in this zone, but you're gonna have to prune it every 6 months or something like that. So people are aware, like, okay, if I can use this, maybe I can have that species. But if I can't get out there, I don't have a gardener, like this thing's gonna double in size in 2 years or something like that. But yeah, finding ways to flag that.
You know, this is really interesting work and really advances a lot, but my question is, how is it replicated at the street level? And what kind of, we've already identified pruning as something that is a requirement to follow your results. What other challenges to your results do you have that you've thought of in terms of our community situation?
Like reproducibility, we're looking at developing a program to do like standardized combustion testing. So the issue with this is I can only compare these 15 species to each other within this test set. Ideally, we can set some clean, simple, reproducible methods and test like 50 species, and then we can compare those 50 species to each other within the sample.
But still, the question is, does in fact doing it at your home is there any evidence to say that it makes a difference? That's sort of my question.
Yeah, so if you use the recommended species or not, does it actually reduce your fire hazard?
Right.
Yeah, that's a very difficult thing to prove. There are folks out there who are trying to use high resolution satellite data pre and post fire, for areas that burn. So that's,
Right, to identify plants that did burn and didn't.
yeah, that's about as close as you can get. And there's so many things that go into that study too. You have no idea like how the wind moved, how much, the structure itself came into play. But there are people out there who are trying to do that. At this point, this is about the best we can do.
No, I'm not doubting your research or anything. I think this is a great direction, but
Yeah,
next step is.
no, it's a great question, and we're looking at we're trying to answer the question of developing green fuel buffers too, and species selection for that. So there are tons of open things from that. So,
This is for any that stood out as whoa, under no circumstances plant that anywhere.
So these guys were not, fire resistant. I just picked these 4 as examples.
Okay.
So these, lemonade and laurel sumac, we also avoid using the word fire resistant.
Okay.
Under the right conditions, any plant will burn if it gets dry enough. But these guys, throughout the summer, were kind of the hardest to ignite and had the weakest flame response. It was also a pretty wet summer, so that's also worth noting too, that it rained a lot the year that we did this.
Was there anything that stood out as the easiest to ignite? Maybe that's the way.
Yeah, so this is actually kind of interesting. The white sage was the easiest to ignite.
But it didn't stay burning.
Yeah, it had the lowest, or not the lowest, but it had low flame height and low flame duration. So it would catch fire very easily, but it would make a small flame that didn't last very long. And that's difficult too. Usually you don't see dominance in all corners. It's 1 or 2, and then it's a cost benefit decision. But yeah.
It seems like ember generation would be an important thing to look at. Did you look at that at all?
I did not, but we have folks who are thinking about it and trying to figure out how to measure that. I think we kind of got hung up on camera technology and trying to figure out a way to quantify ember production in the videos. So that's a really cool question too. Yeah.
So, I live pretty close to the Botanic Garden, I'm right up near the top of Pine Road. So I can tell you that, I can verify for you that the lemonade berries, none of the, even though the fire wrapped through almost our entire yard, the lemonade berries just kind of singed and they were fine. And the ones that really went were the toyons, all the toyons got toasted. And then which leads me to the next question, is the fire went through the Botanic Gardens also.
Yeah.
So does the Botanic Gardens have records about which plants may bloom best
Somebody might.
in that entire acreage and which ones
Yeah.
got wrecked?
That's
Seems
a
like
great
that would be,
question. Again, there's gonna be so many landscape level dynamics at play too. So it can be very hard to tell after the fact what and why things survived the way they did. You can have micro scale wind events and wind tunneling and it can just do weird things. But we do have an accessioning process, so all of our major plants are tagged and tracked. So there probably is some study or at least some record of which ones died during the fire.
Yeah, actually, the former director during that fire used the destruction of particular accessions as part of his insurance claim. So I don't think anybody's looked at that record from the point of view of what burned and what didn't burn. So
Yeah.
there's another research project for you.
No, that's a great question. Because it is a relatively small area and it should be pretty easy to pull the records. But
Yeah, I wonder if the succulent flammability compared to lemonade berry and the sumac flammability of the succulents
Oh, succulent.
compared to those?
Yeah, so it's very difficult to test the flammability of the succulents. We actually talked about trying to do that and decided that they would probably just like gum up the equipment. But I can also say that the lemonade berry, even at the driest point of that pretty wet summer, you would cut it and it was still like leaking. Like it almost looked like a succulent when you cut it. But the leaves are much more shrubby, so it's an interesting plant.
Has any tests on flammability of succulents been done that you know of?
I'm not sure, but I could search it up, but honestly, I'm not sure. It might be the same issue where people look at it and they're like, we're
Too hard
not
to
gonna
test.
mess with this. It's too sticky.
So this is information, and it almost sounds like you want to find out which plants will survive in the wildfire, and not so much the home, because it's all about the amount of heat that the plants are going to produce once they burn, and pretty much how much, well, they're going to dry out a lot if you don't when it doesn't fire.
Yeah.
So have you talked about the proximity of this type of plant? Someone mentioned zone 1.
Yeah. So that we're trying to think about that. That's where we're starting to go with this. But this is something that would go by like firefighters. We want to put this by everyone before we publish this for the city. It's a tough process to try to determine what to recommend to zone 1, zone 2, or farther. At this point, we can kind of make decisions based off like, is it a vine? Does it naturally accumulate a lot of dead material? It's a lot easier to say like, okay, this plant feels like that idea versus like, put this in this zone or another. Did I answer your question?
No, I guess I'm thinking the whole idea is just for your home to survive.
Yes, yeah.
And it was almost sounded like you were talking about surviving watershed if they have plants there. But, and you use small samples, but the thing is a lot of homes are just gonna have vast amounts of
Yeah.
vegetation.
Yeah.
So even though that one plant has that small flamelet, it's gonna be combined by the total mass of the plant.
Yes, yeah, and that was like, one of our primary findings is that more mass is producing larger flamelets and larger combustion times. So you do have to work within a defensible space, spacing plants from each other, spacing plants from the structure. Yeah, so we're actually thinking about the garden, how to build like islands. So if you're gonna create a clump of plants that are spaced from each other, that are like little kind of assemblages of native species, but are far enough apart that they're not gonna ignite each other unless it's extremely, extreme conditions. Yeah.
I'm just curious, this sounds like a problem that try to solve with individual plants and plants that are burning in a field or something. Really, really tough. And I just wonder if anybody is planning like, a computer program where they can put the plants in, they have the transmission of the different kinds of varieties, and they can put them in different, arrangements, and then add wind to it. I mean, it sounds like something to model like that would be much better than trying to find it in the field.
We do. Partly the issue is that there isn't a great record of like, I want to model a lemonade berry garden. Like we need to burn a lot more lemonade berry before we can get those numbers. Which actually brings us back down to a basic science question. So we actually need to burn the plants to record, how they're burning, to then put that back into the model.
Like, fire behavior modeling, shrubs are modeled as one model. It doesn't differentiate by the species.
Oh.
Like, that's a fact, that's how it's done.
Yeah.
So it's just one assumption of this is a shrub model,
Yeah.
and this is how it's gonna burn. It's one variable in the equation. It doesn't say like, well, this is shrubs and it's chamise, or it's shrubs and it's ceanothus, or it's shrubs and it's
These are both
manzanita.
shrubs.
It's all lumped in one model. That's industry standard right now.
Yeah, it's
So-
not like, it's never gonna really.
Because in a fire behavior modeling world, it doesn't matter at that small scale. They're trying to model a 1,000-acre fire. So the makeup of shrublands is sort of irrelevant in macro modeling. So that's why they do that. Because if they were gonna try to create models for individual chaparral species, we would have, I don't know, Nick, how many models would you be looking at? Like, you probably have to break the shrub model into like 20 models, right?
So
Say,
is,
like, it's a problem with modeling.
Sure.
What you,
It sounds simpler than trying to get it out of the natural landscape to me. I
No,
don't know.
actually, because of the modeling inadequacy, there's just an assumption that shrubs all burn the same way, but they don't. So this is actually really.
Right,
so I-
exactly why.
So everybody's been asking a lot of questions about how you would apply this. I've been doing a lot of home evaluations in one of our Santa Barbara communities up in North County. And I'm getting a lot of people saying, okay, I get it, this row of pepper trees that I have is probably not the best thing. But I want something that's gonna provide some screening here on my property. So I don't just wanna cut them all down. Do you have something better that you would recommend? So this is where I think what Kristina's doing, what her project did, is super important. Because nobody wants to live in like a moonscape desert, right? So if you could have better plants that were less flammable, then you could still achieve the same balance of like having a nice yard and having plants and.
Yeah, no,
so modeling is only as good as the data that underpins the model. And there is no data on this stuff. That's why the models don't project. Okay, let me finish. And I think that your work is really very important to the building of a future model, which does not exist today. And I want to hear about your model, sweetheart. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
My mom has hedges of roots and things of the mayberry on both sides of her house. And she's had them there for like 10 or 15 years, and she maintains them with her little trimmers.
yeah.
And you can see it just like as a hedge if you want.
Yeah, they're all over the same amount of nice little hedges.
But it's like, she's right behind Dealing's Park, like a few doors from the bedroom. And it's, you know, when you're in tight neighborhoods, you have to keep these things pruned back really carefully. So it's a good example of what it looks like.
Yeah,
Isn't that really well?
yeah, also the example of like, if you want this as a hedge, you will have to put in effort to trim it. If you let lemonade berry just grow, it'll form these like massive mounds. Yeah, again, I think the ideal use case for this is someone kind of thinking like, what can I do better? You know, I'm sitting down trying to design a landscape, or I'm a landscape professional designing a landscape for a client. Within the constraints of festival space, like what species do I choose? What shrubs, you know, what herbs, what pollinator-friendly species are going to be kind of the lowest quality?
I was just gonna say, just as challenging as developing a model is how to develop the appropriate public messaging. Like you see the public, or the, Board of Forestry struggling with Zone Zero, like they've been doing this for years, keep punting down the road.
Yeah.
Not so much, I mean, everybody understands, you know, dead stuff burns quicker, but how best to message it across the whole state, you know, is challenging. So I think what's important is how you message this and combine it with maintenance, with potentially irrigation, you know, distance. Those are all important, so they don't think it's so remote. You know, if I plant lemonade berry around my house and it can survive, that's not true. But it probably, if it have something, it's a better species than
Juniper.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
That's
just like
the idea.
everything's a scale.
Better than
Juniper.
Yeah.
Is it better than Eugenia? Because that's everywhere.
What is it?
Eugenia?
Is it,
Not native. It's just a main hedge material. All of San Roque.
it's like an ornamental.
It's got very small leaves. It has kind of like a red flesh after it's got out.
That's stuff that we could burn and test. And part of what we do, we go out to the community, we figure out what are the favorite hedge species, and then we can burn them and see which ones perform better.
That one's it.
Yeah.
And it's highly diseased.
Oh, no.
Yes, it is, it's that week.
Yeah.
I wanna go back to the trees. Can you remind me what your 4 trees were that you tested? You had coast oak and eucalyptus globulus, but what? I really wanna know about pepper tree because, my neighbors are planting it.
I can tell you eucalyptus was spicy. We also had toyon, coastal live oak, and California bay. I believe the coastal live oak was the lowest flammability of the 3 species tested. Toyon was interesting. It started out lower flammability, but as it got drier, it got a lot easier to ignite.
So
And
you
then
didn't take pepper tree, darn.
next time.
It makes sense, is that, you know, throughout the summer, and the standard events, you know, they're gonna dry out, and they're gonna ignite more easily. You know, and then the type of, plants are that they're aromatic, they have oil, to make it burn even more concentrated. I'm sure the Santa Barbara Fire, City Council is talking about the proximity. And I do tell people, everything burns, it's just how close it burns to your house. Which is why my first question was, are you talking about saving vegetation or house next to the vegetation?
Yeah, we're just trying to give people information to make like the best decisions that they can with their property. So it's gonna purely like more or less flammable, and then let people make decisions based off that. Any other questions?
Can you get fire services here? And I'd like for them to chime in on what they think. Are you fire
Are you
prevention?
speaking to me?
Yes, sir.
My former boss is this gentleman here, but, and Nick is extremely, you have some of the most two talented gentlemen sitting right next to me. I would add, the point that you were making is really good. Like, are we trying to protect plants? Are we trying to protect the infrastructure? And you're absolutely right. Her presentation is on one part of the whole picture. So like if you look at what the Fire Safe Council is doing, there's landscape hardening and there's also home hardening, 2 separate things. You could have a debate on which one's more fruitful. I would probably lean more towards the home hardening because like you said, everything's gonna burn. And your house can be great, but embers fly a long way. And if you live anywhere here, anywhere north of here, you're gonna have an ember on your property 100% for sure in the next, 30 years. So, is your home gonna be able to hold that back?
And I'm thinking about you do landscaping approval and plants. Yes, the fire prevention girl,
What was the question?
landscaping plants.
It has to be approved landscaping plans for like new development.
New development, yes.
They do, yeah.
Okay. So would you use that information that she's providing with us, or do you have your own in terms of, state fire?
No, so that's where the work that Kristina is doing with,
Yeah,
once
we're
this is
gonna
matured, will be incredibly useful for landscape plans. Because currently, no. Currently, it's just a defensible space guidelines. They're not looking at actual plants going, that's too flammable, we're not gonna replant that. They'll look at the spacing and how close it is to the building. But they won't actually look at like, oh, that's salvia and it's too flammable.
What's the list the city has?
They have lists of recommended plans and
Oh, it's
plants you
just
shouldn't,
recommended?
and plants you shouldn't plant. in
It's
certain
worded, so
zones.
it sounds like it's
But-
stronger than that?
Yeah.
Cause I know that we have a property that's 42 years old.
I'm not speaking for the county, also not the city. I don't
Okay,
know.
I can work for the county, but there's a city list.
Yeah,
That's
city has a list.
but it sounds like it's for new stuff. But we have a lot of the stuff they don't get planted. So, trying to convince people to change, yeah, that's fun. So,
There's a lot of exciting stuff happening right now. Like the data she's putting together, there's programs, AI, to your point, modeling, the modeling that we've been doing, yeah, there's one level for, shrubs, but then there's another level that's just trees, right? So it's not very specific, but now we're getting, satellite heat data, satellite density data, satellite temperature data, with all this, just mind-boggling amount of information coming in, the microclimates, there's so many weather stations, and all that's going into these huge programs, and that stuff's all coming online right now. The fire service is changing really rapidly right now with being able to detect stuff and understand where stuff's gonna burn.